I'm director of Strata consultancy firm Strata Solve, and that's stratasolve.com.au. Alongside me, as always, Frank Higginson, partner at Hines Legal, and of course, sector expert of some renown. Frank, hello.
Hello, Chris. Hello, everyone.
Renown. It's always about the renown. Isn't it?
Yeah, it's always that tricky word. Do you do it with a K or not?
That's true, actually. Maybe we'll have a whole webinar about pronouncing things at some point. There'll be plenty of them in this space. As always, everybody, as always, we encourage everybody's participation and engagement. If you want to shoot us a query, please do so. If it's a bit more involved, we've put up a link for you to actually put the details of your more involved query as well, and we'll get back to you on that one. If you're new to our show, we live stream to YouTube and Facebook every Thursday at 2 o'clock Brisbane time. So to follow us on Facebook, go to Hines Legal and hit the like button and icon. And for YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. And we'll give you those details again a bit later on. Frank, kind of a sequel this week, isn't it, to a prior webinar?
It is. Sequel with nuances. You know, we've looked at what I suppose individual owners can do, feel like when it comes to bullying, and today's sort of the other group of people that tend to get bullied in bodies corporates, which is really sort of caretakers, body corporate managers, and by a range of different people. So it's sort of, again, mate, it's a repetitive theme. This stuff, we see this a lot, hits both of our desks a lot. Certainly in the newspapers, a lot in relation to general business terms, but it's sort of in strata. There's previous webinar we covered it, but there's some slight differences today as it relates to people that actually have contracts with their bodies corporate.
We're also going to touch upon the committee issue. So it's the flip side of the prior one, isn't it? So the prior one was about owners and occupiers who might be feeling bullied in the strata context. We're going to go, to be fair, the flip side of that. And I think necessarily, Frank, there'll be a lot.
And Chris has got some glitchiness going on today with, sorry.
Are you back?
I am. You're glitching though. Right. Go again. There'll be a lot of similarities.
There will be a lot of similarities.
Slight changes.
Very slight changes. Now, as per what we said the last time, we get that bullying is a hot button topic and it might provoke some very strong and intense reactions in people, which we totally get and respect. We're not trained for that kind of thing though. Frank and I are body corporate experts. So that's what we will be talking about, the body corporate perspective. That's what we're good at. Well, I think we're good at it anyway. Can't speak for anybody else. I think we are. All right. Now, Frank, I might kick off with, I saw a comment during the week on a blog that is devoted to Strata where somebody said that the committee were being bullied. My view is the committee can't be bullied because bullying is all about an individual. What do you think?
Agree. I think it's really hard to bully a group of people. And even when you look at the definitions, again, that we covered in our previous webinar, and we'll put up links to those again in terms of what bullying actually is. It's behaviour directed towards an individual in a legal sense. So we've got to remember that, again, in strata law, bullying is not a word that's used in the Act or the modules or anywhere else. So we're sort of left with this phrase appearing in a strata context. So I think bullying by its very nature, in a sense, to me at least, is targeting someone individually as opposed to a group of people. So a committee in that sense can't be bullied, would be my immediate take.
Yeah, I would think so too. So I think our first focus today then is not so much about bullying of a committee, but bullying about committee member, a distinct committee member. So as per last time that we spoke about this, there is no such thing as bullying under strata legislation, well, anywhere, I think, Frank, is what we established.
In strata, absolutely not.
Yep.
So there's this again, the obligation to act reasonably gets imposed on committees and bodies corporates, and that's about as much as we've actually got.
So instead, we looked around for some definitions which might have some application. We came up with two in particular, didn't we? So the first one, which we'll give you the links for, is the Human Rights Commission and their view on bullying. And then we also had the Fair Work Commission, which becomes very relevant in this discussion that we're doing about, it'll become very relevant in a minute for caretakers and managers. And I think what we came up with, Frank, the previous time, was that bullying is about something systemic, isn't it?
It's certainly, it's repeated. It's not one-off. You come back to sort of the Fair Work definition. It's sort of something that creates a risk to health and safety. And then there's a bunch of different ways where that behaviour might manifest itself. So, and I think, you know, Chris, and I suppose we see it all the time in terms of, we ran through some examples about what that actually might look like for people individually. So when we're talking about bullying committee members, how that can manifest itself, you know, it's sort of singling out, you know, one of the committee members. It might be that a single committee member, and this does happen. People are seen as the, you know, most committees, you know, my take would be, and correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, in your experience, there's usually one or two people that tend to lead the committee. And then there's a bunch of people that I wouldn't say necessarily follow, but they're there as supporters, make up the numbers sometimes, but tend to follow the lead of the leaders. So those, and that might be the chairperson, it might be just someone else individually. So those individual people that are seen to be the leaders are the ones that can be targeted individually by lot owners, caretakers, body corporate managers, or otherwise.
And it might be that, you know, I mean, talking about human nature as we are, it might be that the bullying in this case is where somebody identifies that a particular member of the committee is, for want of a better expression, Frank, the weakest link, the one who they can dominate, the one who they can manipulate, the one who might be most susceptible to the behaviour in question. Equally, it might be the other way around. It might actually be the targeting of the strongest and most outspoken one to attempt to put them in their place, so to speak.
Yep. And that then can be a bunch of emails late at night. It can be probably the use of emails or language that includes lots of emotional words, you know, describing words, as my daughter would tell me, adjectives, demanding things that they know can't or cannot or can't be done or won't be done, or the committee's not inclined to do. And even, I suppose, Chris, that old fail-safe, bailing people up face to face. You run into the person in the hallway or the car park and it's, hey, what about? Whatever it might be.
And that sort of stuff is okay depending on how you do it. Like, I think we're always big advocates for talking and communicating, and if you can do it in person and it's fine to do that, then you should. But it's where you sort of bail them up and it's a bit threatening and it's a bit, you know, particularly if it involves an invasion of personal space, I think that's really problematic in particular. That's what we think bullying from a committee member's perspective is. And then we go on, Frank, to the nature of what bullying might look like for a body corporate manager or a caretaker. And that, Frank, is where things get different, doesn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's really, this is a little bit complicated at times, but, and everyone thinks that the Fair Work Act applies only to employees, but it doesn't. That's the first thing. It applies to workers. So workers can be employees, but they can also be other people in contractual relationships. So what we'll put up is a newsletter that we wrote a couple of years back, where a resident manager went to the Fair Work Commission to seek an order that the chairperson refrain from bullying them, and they were successful in that. So the starting point, though, and this is as close as I get to being a constitutional lawyer, is that Fair Work Act is a federal piece of legislation. So the way our system of law works is we've got a federal constitution that says that the federal government can deal with matters relating to X, Y, and Z, and everything else is then left to the states. That's why, for example, the criminal laws are all dealt with state by state, because the federal constitution doesn't say that the federal government has jurisdiction over state-based criminal laws, only over federal-based ones. So where it gets to is the constitution says that the federal government can deal with companies. And so here's the really important thing in terms of, to the extent that the Fair Work Act applies to a worker, that worker needs to be a company. So it needs to be Chris Irons Proprietary Limited, who is engaging Chris personally to do whatever, and Chris might be the director, and the bullying needs to be directed at that company. If you own, for example, a management rights business, or you're providing body corporate management services in an individual capacity, then you don't have the benefit of that particular piece of legislation. And I suppose, Chris, I might add one more thing, and the reason that there hasn't been a whole lot of litigation around that in a strata sense is that Fair Work's objective is really to stop the bullying. It's not to award damages. It's not to, give away awards of hundreds of thousands of dollars and all that sort of stuff. That's completely separate to this. The Fair Works Commission is to try to, I suppose, in a sense, create workplaces that work, and a workplace that has bullying, its mission is to stop the bullying. And that's where its jurisdiction almost starts and finishes in relation to what we're talking about today. So that's why you don't see a whole lot of cases there. But when it comes to people that are contracted to bodies corporate, and I suppose, Chris, that's the big difference between this and the previous webinar we've done, is that individual lot owners don't have a contract with their body corporate. They are part of a strata relationship by virtue of their ownership of a lot. But when we're talking about body corporate managers or resident managers, they actually have agreements with the body corporate as an entity to provide services in exchange for remuneration. So the nature of that relationship is A, voluntary and created by ownership, versus one, contractual, for which remuneration is paid for a particular service or services to be provided.
That's a really good overview, Frank. Yeah,
makes sense. And then, once you get into that, the type of behaviour that we see in relation to those contracted people is roughly similar, except but again, slightly different again, because the difference in one sense is that people having issues with individual owners, that tends to be a more sort of personal attack. What we have with contracted arrangements with the body corporate is there's the ability for the bullying or the behaviour to relate to those contracts themselves. I'm going to terminate you. I'm going to breach you. I'm going to bring your agreements to an end. Those are the sort of behaviours that get added on to what we were just talking about before.
Yep. Again, that's a really good overview of things, Frank. And I think that holding that threat over the individual managers, be it a strata manager or caretaker's head, of either cutting off or reduction, I think that's where we start to get, and I think what you're saying there is that's where we start to get into some bullying behaviour that might be really problematic for the members of the body corporate concerned, for all the reasons that you outlined before. So the most simple solutions, if we're going to talk about solutions, then maybe, Frank, it comes back to that really, really basic but difficult at the same time thing of understanding roles.
Absolutely. And that's, again, mate, we keep doing these things, and hopefully people are watching them, to try to get to the core of these issues. And this still remains a problem, and it will be an ongoing problem, I think, for when the Act arrived. It's the same thing as what it is today, is that people don't understand the nature of the legal relationships which they're stepping into when they buy into a strata title scheme.
Yeah.
So they buy a lot, and so a lot of the behavioural issues we see on all sides of the fence, can be based on any number of things, but I would suggest that the majority of them, the vast majority of them, start from people not understanding how this thing works, how this body corporate works, what this person actually does or should do. And that applies from a lot owner perspective to a committee perspective to a resident manager and to a body corporate manager. And to be fair, sometimes people aren't good at explaining what they do. And I suppose it's a little bit different in the sense of lawyers have been around forever. probably one of the oldest professions, but maybe not the oldest, although people would say some of the oldest professions are probably more honourable than lawyers. And most people understand what lawyers do, give or take. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's a perception there, your university, blah, 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 blah. No one, not no one, a lot of people don't understand the differences between the role of a body corporate manager and a caretaker.
Yep.
And then you add on a letting agent. And so you have these attacks, and particularly in circumstances where things might be going wrong in the body corporate, there might be roof leaks, flooding issues, whatever it might be. And when people are feeling frustrated or frightened or concerned, they can fire rockets at all sorts of people who don't necessarily deserve them and might not or should not be on the receiving end of them.
It's human nature again, Frank, isn't it? When you are unsure about something, usually there are two ways that you go. You either put up your hand and say, I'm unsure, please explain, to quote somebody else, or you plow straight through and you bluff your way through it, don't you? And that bluffing is where the aggression then starts to kick in. And I've seen both examples of that in my career. I know you have too, Frank. And it's usually, well, not usually, always the bluffing your way through that leads to the problem.
Yeah, and then people can't back down and it escalates, and then suddenly you're engaging strata consultants or lawyers to help resolve the much bigger issue than it was.
That's right.
And I think probably the other thing that sometimes when these things escalate from a resident manager or body corporate manager perspective, and body corporate managers probably cop this more than what resident managers do in terms of, coming in on Monday and they've got emails from 500 different people. The reality is that when you are contracted to an entity, you report to that entity via its representatives. So when that is a body corporate side of things, and we're exactly the same as lawyers, when we're acting for a body corporate, we report to the committee. We don't report to any owner at all, as much as owners will sometimes email us if they're not happy, if they know that we've been engaged to advise against them or whatever it might be. And our perfect world is also only engaging with a single committee member. Now that might be chairperson or whatever, or it might be send everything through the body corporate manager and they'll circulate it out. But from our own sanity perspective and our own cost perspective, it's much more effective for us to report to an individual and get instructions from an individual, and those come back to us. A lot of the misconceptions and a lot of the issues that come up, and strata managers and resident managers are the same, is they're getting emails from everyone. Now, there might be 4 or 5 people on the committee. It might be a bunch of disaffected lot owners who aren't happy with whatever the particular issue is. And they're trying to reply to all those people when actually it's not their job. Their job is to report to the committee. So in a sense, and what we do, if the lot owner's emailing me about an issue that we're not acting for them, hey, you should do this or you should do that, I get that. I forward it through to my committee liaison, be that the body corporate manager or otherwise, and say, okay, I've received this email from Chris. How do you want me to respond, if at all? And that, in these days of instantaneous communication with the ability just to type an address and press send, it's really, really easy to get caught up in the maelstrom of emails and replies all and that sort of stuff. And that is a really bad thing. Oh, and we've lost Chris again. So Chris is glitching a little bit today on his email. So from that,
I'm back.
perspective, you're good, righto, mate. I'll keep fumbling. Not our first time with this radio.
No, I've been keeping up.
Yeah, good. So I think part of it, I think for both of us, the immediate response sometimes, not the immediate response, the 24-hour rule applies, but a way to help people understand from a, that body corporate manager or resident manager perspective is to set people who are under a misapprehension about the role right in a gentle way about what it is the role actually includes. So it's not, mate, bugger off, that's not my job. It's like, really sorry, I've got a contract. Contract says I've got to do this. This is how it has to work, and this is how you need to deal with your particular concerns now. So if you've got a problem with the driveway not being clean, here's how you make that complaint.
Yep, I think so, Frank.
And then we'll work backwards from there.
That's really well said. We're also getting a lot of questions and comments coming in. Thanks all. We will try and get to most, if not all of those shortly. What we will do now, and we did this with the previous webinar as well, what are the consequences of feeling bullied? What does it look like? What does it result in from the perspective of a committee member, a body corporate manager, or a caretaker? Well, we reckon these are the sorts of things which will transpire. And unsurprisingly, negative communications, things not getting done would be a big one. I mean, if I'm somebody who's meant to be doing a job for the body corporate and I feel like I'm being bullied, it stands to reason I'm not going to be terribly motivated to either do the work or do it the way that everyone would prefer. Then there's like not responding to requests or emails. How many times, Frank, do you and I hear, oh, no, the manager won't get back to me, the committee won't reply to me. Maybe they're not replying because they're actually gun shy of doing so for fear of what the next response is going to be. This is this idea of accumulated sets of feelings building up over
and it's a feeling thing, isn't it? There's nothing legal about any of this. This is all feelings, feelings and behaviours. So,
yep. Obviously, there is the seeking of legal advice or initiating proceedings against owners or body corporate for their actions. And Frank, you articulated that really well before about the Fair Work Commission possibility. There won't be the same kind, I think we just touched upon this one too, there won't be the same kind of value add if one of those parties is feeling bullied. So all of those people have things defined in contracts, terms, and we all know that sometimes people go above and beyond a contract for the sake of a value add, but there'd be no motivation for a manager or a contractor to do that. Equally, there'll be no motivation for a committee member to spend a bit more of their voluntary time on something if they're feeling bullied. From the body corporate manager's perspective, Frank, one of the big consequences is that you get dropped as a building.
And there are those buildings out there. And I've lost track of the conversations with strata managers I've had over the years. You talk about the 80-20 rule. I reckon that's so applicable in body corporate management. 20% of your clients cause you 80% of your problems. Yep. And I know strata managers, have a, their business is built on lots under management and all that sort of stuff. But dead set, if you carved off some of those difficult buildings, life would be much easier. And I know over the years, I've certainly got better at saying no to clients who I know are going to be difficult. You know what I mean? And it's not even difficult. Reframe that. We have a certain way of working. I'm a great emailer. I'm not a big, long chatterer on the phone. I'm short and sharp to the point. And I suppose maybe that manifests itself in how we're presenting these things today. But that's how I operate. If you want to sit down and have a 2-hour conversation with me about every issue that comes up, we are not going to gel together because I don't have the bandwidth to do that. So recognizing that and let clients know that early is really important. And I think particularly strata managers could probably sometimes have a bit of a tighter look at who they actually deal with more regularly, but that absolutely happens. The other thing with contractual disputes and disputes of any nature, it's just leaving aside the legalities of it all in terms of whether you're in a proceeding or otherwise and the money. It's the cost and the stress. For me, the biggest sign of difficulty is you get an email, someone or the phone number pops up on your phone and your gut clenches and you don't want to deal with it. That is a really, really bad sign. So to me, that's a consequence of that negative type relationship. So I suppose if Chris is back, and I think this is really it, in terms of solutions for these things, and this is part of the difficulty, and Chris gave me this line years ago when he was commissioner running this, is they're never going to be able to legislate to deal with human behaviour. So that is a difficulty. So looking at, in one sense, we can be accused of being a nanny state, over-regulated up the wazoo, and then in another sense, you look at the type of things that go on in strata communities, there's nothing in there at all about the issues that people are dealing with day by day. So, and it's always one of those things you've got to be careful what you wish for. So I think for me, when you're feeling that way, certainly, and I suppose there is certainly some different nuances here from committee, from body corporate manager into resident manager. If you're feeling under attack as a committee member, as a committee, very easy solution is just resign. You can resign on a moment's notice. So even any committee role, you're only there for as long as you want to be there. So certainly there's ways to remove you along the way, but you can resign on a moment's notice and it's done. So if you're feeling under attack and you don't want to be involved anymore, resign. And if you really don't want to be involved in the community, sell your unit. That's a quick, down and dirty, easy way to fix it. The other thing, of course, is sometimes it's a look in the mirror as to, you know, and certainly I think Chris would probably agree, is that dead set of all the disputes that come across our desks, it's very rare for them to be completely caused by one person. That's the reality of it. So there's normally, and there might be degrees of who's escalated at what particular point in time, but most of them have a degree of cause at both sides of the fence. So in a sense, a look in the mirror as to what you could do better to calm this down will be better for you in the long run. That is for sure and for certain. You know, from a management rights perspective and body corporate manager perspective, sale from a management rights perspective is one way to get rid of problems. Looking to have that face-to-face conversation, and body corporate managers are the same. Email is almost the most effective bullying tool that you've ever seen. And you know, one particular lawyer I refer to as an email bully. He's awesome on the emails, sending snarky ones, never shows up face-to-face. So I think it's a whole lot harder to be brutal to people when you've got to sit down and look them in the eye. Some people can do it really well, but it tends to get people to back off a little bit. And from a strata manager perspective, obviously the ultimate fail-safe is bringing your engagement to an end. Now, that's probably not realistic in a management rights sense, because obviously there's a whole lot more value tied up in management rights agreements. But, you know, in management rights, certainly the case over the years, I've had clients with letting owners that are really, really hard to keep satisfied. Saying no to that person, go away and use someone else to manage a unit. Here's your keys. I'm not going to worry about giving you the 90 days if you don't want it. Away you go. Go find someone else and be happy with those people. So it's sort of exiting. So if you're not desirous of having a face-to-face conversation or trying to resolve these things yourselves, there is a way to exit it. Because I think for me, the key of this, if nothing changes, nothing changes. It's if you don't try to do something different, it will continue to be the same way. Christopher.
Hello.
So there's some of the things we're talking about. Mate, I'll just wrap up the bit talking about some of the solutions, and we might do some of the questions then. So, so if you know, there's a range, and then there might be, and this is services that Chris offers, that mediation or sit-down proposal where everyone gets together and he'll facilitate a conversation that might clear the air. You know, it's sort of these things. If you don't do something about it, it will continue to happen. And what can the government do? I mean, this is, we had a strata title law reform working group meeting that was supposed to be on today, but has been deferred. Maybe, just maybe, there's the ability to amend section 167 of the Act to deal with nuisance hazard and perhaps some of the behaviours that we're talking about today, because they're very prevalent in terms of strata communities. So maybe there could be some more actionable ability in relation to those provisions that might slow down some of these issues, might help people at least be brought to the table to have a conversation if they don't want to otherwise do it.
Absolutely, Frank. Apologies that I've been out of the loop there, but Frank, you've been handling it brilliantly.
Maybe.
I think you have. I think you're right, Frank. Let's rip into some of the questions and comments. Jude, thanks for your question. More, I think, a suggestion for maybe a future webinar. Jude, cover the disbursement secret scroll of body corporate management costs. Interesting. You might like to drop a line via the link that we put up right at the start, Jude, so that you can clarify what you actually mean by that.
Some examples would be good.
Yeah. That'd be great. Thank you. Steve, a couple of comments there. Thanks for tuning in, Steve. Steve says that the legislation does have no mention of bullying, but does have provision for caretaking contractor to act honestly, fairly, and professionally. Has that been tested? Frank?
Not to my knowledge. That's code of conduct type territory, which is sort of really motherhood statements to me. And I think it's important to point out too, and I didn't mention this before, but if you're a contractor to a body corporate, the same as we are when we're providing services, having the committee ask questions about how you're going about what you're doing is not bullying. Performance management handled the right way is not bullying.
No.
So it is totally open to a committee to understand what's going on. Now, that's not saying they're dictating to people, because I mean, as Highs pointed out down below, the caretaker is not an employee, they're a contractor. So, you know, as an employer, I can say to my staff, I expect you to log on at 8:30 and finish at 5, and then during your day, you're going to do X, Y, and Z. The same as body corporate managers and caretakers, they're contractors. So their contract says what they've got to do, and they've got to do what that contract says. So if it says mow the lawn once a week, for example, it's not for the committee to say, you must mow that at 9 o'clock on Monday. If it's got to be done weekly, when the caretaker decides to do it is up to them. But by the same token, and this is this I suppose relationship management really is, and what I'd say to resident manager clients is, if the committee's asking how you're going about what it is that you're doing, there's an element of trust there that might not quite be there, and the question is why. So getting that back on foot and managing that little red flag and managing that would be the right way to do it. But them asking the question, the committee asking the question, the same with body corporate managers, is not bullying.
We better hurry up and finish the rest of these very, very quickly. Julia, as always, thanks for tuning in. What about trust with a corporate trustee? Not 100% sure what you're referring to.
Well, I reckon that's in relation to the Fair Work Commission, and that's a company.
Okay. Thank you, Frank. Mr. SMB, the previous webinar about bullying, did HL say that the body corporate scheme is not a workplace? That got my attention. For our standard module scheme considers itself a workplace. I think, Frank, you covered that today. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what I'll do is I'll put up a newsletter that I wrote in 2011 about how I think the work health and safety legislation applies to bodies corporates. Short version, if you've got some commercial use of your property going on in terms of letting side of things, my view is that you are more than likely a workplace.
Yep. Will at the end has asked, what's the difference between harassment and bullying? That's a really good question, Will. I would say largely in the eye of the beholder when it comes to the Strata context, because they're not defined under Strata legislation at law. They may well have a specific meaning.
Yes, there'll be legislative definitions somewhere, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure what they are. But dare I say it, harassment, I think, would probably be a little bit more intense than bullying. That would be my gut feel, but don't take that as legal advice.
I would tend to agree, and also don't take that as legal advice. We need to sum up and finish. Look, this has been a really good discussion today about the flip side of bullying, I suppose. Again, if you're new to our show, we live stream to YouTube and Facebook every Thursday at 2 o'clock Brisbane time. So you might want to put that in your diaries or set an alarm or something like that. So to follow us on Facebook, go to Heinz Legal page and hit the like button and icon. And for YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. You'll get some show notes from us post-webinar with some of the links that we spoke about today, which will be really useful thereafter. For now, though, we need to sum it up there. It's been great, everybody. Frank, as always, it's been awesome.
I started on the right, now I'm finishing on the left.
Sorry about the tech issues today. It's just been one of those days, everybody. Thank you. Thanks for taking the time, everyone. Always appreciate it. We'll see you next time. See you.
Done. See you, everyone.